On to the next question. Simon asked, how do we measure biodiversity? Great question, Simon. To start with, biodiversity is broadly the diversity of life, and it includes the diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. And biodiversity is really important. Apart from the intrinsic value of nature and of species, biodiversity is valuable to us humans because it provides many goods and services, from the provision of crop varieties, from wild food harvests and medicines, pollination, carbon sequestration, the list goes on. So all in all, biodiversity is fundamental to life as we know it. And because biodiversity is such a broad term, there are many different ways that we can try to measure it, and I'll just be giving a very brief overview to some of these today. From here on out, I'll be using the word assemblage and ecological community a lot, and these basically just mean a group of organisms which live together in a given space or at a given time. There is firstly genetic diversity, where you can look at how diverse the gene pool is within a species population. And the more genetic variation there is within a population, the more resilient that population will be. It means that if conditions suddenly change, it's more likely that some of the individuals within that population will be able to cope with the change or disturbance. This makes the population more adaptable, and also having greater genetic diversity can lower the risk of genetic diseases spreading throughout the population. Species diversity is the most commonly measured aspect of biodiversity, and you can measure species richness, which is essentially just how many species are within an assemblage. Or you can look at species evenness, which is a measure of how even the population sizes of each species are within an assemblage. In other words, are there one or two species that completely dominate the community while others are sparsely populated, or are species more or less equally abundant? Greater species richness and evenness can increase the resilience of an ecosystem in all of the functions and services it provides, and it can increase the resistance of that ecosystem to change in the face of disturbance. Along with species richness and evenness, you can also look at how similar the composition of species is between assemblages. So how many species are shared between assemblages, or how many do they not share? This can tell you how much an ecological community is changing over space, or how quickly the community is changing over time. Next, you can look at functional diversity or functional trait diversity. So different species have different traits. In trees, for example, you can have trees with broadleaves or with needles, with smooth bark or furrowed bark or spiky bark. Some spread out while others are tall and narrow, and some have fruit and others don't. So traits like these affect how an individual interacts with other organisms and with their environment. Like with species, you can look at trait richness and evenness, and for changes in trait composition. And lastly, there's habitat diversity, which is the diversity of habitats or land cover types within a landscape. So many facets of biodiversity, and within each of these facets, there are many different metrics and indices used to actually quantify biodiversity. And so there's a lot of resources that you can look at that go more in depth into this if you're interested, and I'll link them in the description below, but I'll leave it at that for now.